Good morning, everybody. We're here today to listen to Mark Bradley, CEO of LMN, talk to us about how to use a sales process to focus on the right work for you. Just a couple of housekeeping tips. We're using the question tab in your dashboard. The webinar dashboard has a question tab. Please feel free to ask questions at any time using this tab, and we'll go ahead and ask that out loud to Mark during the session. So please don't wait to the end of the session where Mark is happy to take questions throughout the presentation. Mark, please go ahead and start the session today.
Okay, great. Welcome everybody, and thanks for logging in. We're going to get started just talking today about using a sales process to focus on driving the right type of work for your business and meeting those sales goals that you've hopefully set out to achieve in your budget this year. So a couple quick things off the start. I guess question number one that you have to ask yourself is, do you actually have a sales process right now? Often we run our businesses and we kind of have ways of doing things or sort of some habits, and we kind of think they're processes, but ultimately I don't think it's entirely a process until we're capable of doing things like writing it down very quickly, or reminding others what it is, or maybe even doing some training for our staff to teach them how that sales process should be taking place on a day-to-day basis. And then last, does the sales process really communicate value? And I'm going to kind of discuss that in detail over the next hour here. But I think, ask yourself these quick questions. If you've got a pen and paper handy, hopefully, be honest with yourself. Do you have a sales process? Can you write it down super fast? Or can you rehearse it? And then obviously, does it communicate value? So ultimately, the sales process needs to answer one major question, and that's why a customer should really choose you. Ultimately, the sales process is going to make it possible for you to get the work that you really want to get, and it's going to kind of make that more or less automated if the process is really dialed in. Often in workshops that we teach, I get contractors asking, how over the years in my own landscape company, I was able to get the type of projects that I was doing, the larger design build jobs or the gardening contracts that were paid hourly. I mean, I did a lot of T&M work, a lot of large commercial snow contracts. It was kind of an odd mix, but I really kind of found my niche markets, and I just built a sales process for each area of the business. And then I just worked that sales process until it was so refined that it kind of generated growth on its own. And really that's what we're going to talk about today. So ultimately, why a customer should choose you is the outcome of this sales process that we're going to talk about. So, first off, ask how your sales process is working today. And if you don't have a process, obviously, ask yourself how your sales are going. Ultimately, we all have leads that come into our businesses. We've got these opportunities, and then we've got these, clients that are the result of our marketing and how we've managed these leads and opportunities. But are those clients, or is the type of work that you're doing today where you want your company to be, say, in 5 years from now? And I think often that's got to be the guiding light for creating a sales process is, where do you want the company to be, and what is your ideal client? Because I think if you don't set your sales process up to get the ideal customer or that ideal client, it's ultimately going to become impossible for you to ever really achieve that vision. So the sales process is kind of that roadmap that will kind of automatically guide you in the direction that you'd like to go with your customers. I think we all have a perception of our own companies, of what we look like to our customers. And often people sort of build websites and hire other people to build the websites. And somehow during that whole process, a lot of things get lost in translation. And what I mean by that is we've got sort of our version of why customers should choose us. And then we have, their version of why they choose us. And, often when I look at landscapers' websites, I see things, they're claiming to be bigger or maybe more personal, a family-run business. Most will claim to be best-in-class service. Often, with snow companies, you see the fastest response time, or in design build, you see a lot of highest quality kind of claims. And hopefully, but once in a while, people talk about fair price or a good deal. But ultimately, I think each company has to create their own unique selling position. And really, I think it's much easier as a landscaper to kind of aim to be uncommon as opposed to aiming to be unique. It's hard to come up with something where you're the only one offering it. And that's really kind of almost impossible, I think, in today's market. So I think being uncommon in your approach and how you offer your services is probably the best sort of angle to take when trying to differentiate yourself from others. I think trying to be unique, one of a kind is kind of a stretch in the landscape business. How do you kind of be uncommon? That's what we're going to talk about. And ultimately, it's a little bit different for everybody. I can't say that there's a right and wrong here. I think your uncommon approach has to be very personalized. It has to be something that you are actually passionate about in the way that you do your business that will attract customers. But we're going to talk about how to kind of share that in a more organic way, I think, so that customers feel more comfortable working with us. So sales differentiation, if you've ever read any sales books or thought much about sales, which I'm assuming most people who are on this webinar have thought about sales, we try to differentiate ourselves in these conversations with our customers. And we do that by, creating conversations. Hopefully we're doing some research in advance and kind of asking the customer questions about how they're going to make their decisions and all these sort of key things that it takes to really sort of understand what the customer wants. And obviously the better we are at doing this, the more uncommon we start to be. So, asking the customer about their previous experience and really sort of becoming aware of what the customer is looking for and what their buying criteria looks like and what's important to them. But I think ultimately the way you handle that process makes you uncommon in itself, because, let's face it, a lot of contractors kind of show up and tell the customer the way it is and the way they do things. And the customer's kind of left standing there feeling as though they sort of need to fit into a box that contractor just described. And I think being uncommon is really sort of turning that upside down. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go here. So I think a typical sales meeting in the industry looks like this. And I don't think it's a good model, but this is kind of what it looks like. The salesperson shows up and introduces themselves to the customer. The way that that's done is pretty important, but we'll get into that later. Then number two, I guess, some fact finding happens, and that fact finding is kind of going in two directions. The customer's asking questions and the contractor is also asking questions. And I believe that the order that happens and the way that happens has a big impact on the likelihood to sell the work. And then ultimately, there's a sales pitch. And I feel like often we get to these sort of sales pitch kind of point in the conversation before we've actually really gotten the customer's information clear or really got the confidence from the customer. And I think when we start to get to the sales pitch too soon, we really hurt ourselves. And I guess that's a big component of the process. And I think when most contractors don't have a process, this sort of basic flow chart here is what ends up happening. We introduce ourselves, we find out what the customer wants, we tell them how we do business, and then we give them a price, or we start to explain, what we're offering. And I think that's great, but we can probably do a better job in the middle. So I think it's up to you as a contractor to create your own uncommon approach. It's not something that somebody can do for you. We can't, here at LMN, we can't just build a sales process that everybody can follow to a T, because we all run different businesses and we all have very different offerings and specialties and niche markets that we service, and even regionally, there's quite a difference when you kind of look across North America and see how people do things just based on the physical locations they operate in. But I think to start with, understanding that there's a real distinction between these phases of the conversation once you get to the point where you're meeting with a customer. I think there's just this opportunity to more or less make the deal in that meeting versus kind of lose the deal in that meeting. And I don't know that everybody that goes out to sell landscape work thinks of the importance of each meeting. Now, hopefully you've got a screening process in place, and when the phone rings, and by the time you get to that first meeting, you've made sure that the client is the right client to be meeting with, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But when you sit down with a customer, you want to make sure that this process is kind of followed. And first off, fact finding, it needs to be very deep, and it needs to be handled very carefully. I think it's important that we ask as many questions as we can early in the conversation when we start to meet with a customer. Again, whether it's residential or commercial, wouldn't matter. We just need to really ask and listen before we start getting into the education phase of the conversation. So, these are our opportunities to really sort of find out exactly what the customer thinks they want, why they want it, get a real good understanding of the history of the property. If it's a brand new design build, we might want to know, how long they've lived there, and if they've done landscaping in the past, and if so, why did they hire the person they did? If it's a maintenance contract, again, same thing. We're going to try to understand why they're out shopping for a new contractor, and why they made the decision to call us, and what they're looking for to be different in the relationship moving forward. These are important things that our fact-finding techniques need to uncover. And these are always going to be a little bit different for different segments of the business. So I always think that it's worth having a sales process for each major area of the business. So if we do snow, there's going to be a much different sales process than if we do, let's say, design build landscape work. And again, it would be different again if we were selling residential landscape maintenance versus commercial landscape maintenance. So these processes and these questions, the facts that we're trying to understand, are going to be different depending on the type of client. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is let the customer talk. And that means asking really good questions and being confident in that question list and never missing one of those questions. And then really understanding what they're saying very clearly before we start to get into education and differentiation. And what that second phase is us kind of answering to the information that we gathered in the fact finding. And as you can imagine, if we start giving them the answers or telling them the way we do business before we've fully understood what they want, we might turn them off. And I think that happens a lot in the business. I know myself, I've sold a lot of landscape work over the years. And I can't tell you how many customers would tell me the reason that they didn't choose the other contractors was just that they weren't flexible and they were rigid to deal with. That was probably the second most common reason. The other reason I think we already all know is nobody else called them back or showed up. These are pretty basic things to overcome. We have to call people back and show up. That's obvious. But number two, we just need to be really good at asking questions and then explaining what we have to offer with some flexibility in mind. And I think that's what makes you uncommon, is your ability to be more flexible. So during that education and differentiation phase, it's your chance to really kind of explain your company, how you do things. You're going to sell yourself as a salesperson, and you might be the owner or a partner in the company, or you might be a account manager. Everybody's got different titles, but many different people wear the sales hat in landscape companies. The point here is all of them need to be trained to do this properly if you want to be as successful as you can be. The benefits and the sort of end result of doing business with your company needs to be what makes you really uncommon. There needs to be something there that attaches them to you as a company. They need to see your work, of course. They need to understand how your process works, how to do business with you. They need to feel comfortable with you, but ultimately, in the end, they just want to know what's going to be better about doing business with you versus all of your other competitors that they might be meeting with. And then I think this phase 3 comes into to play late in the conversation. And again, often when I'm teaching workshops, I'll ask people, hey, do you ask your customers for budget? And people laugh, and they always kind of giggle, and the room kind of starts to get a little louder. And usually somebody will always say, yeah, I ask customers for budgets, but they never want to give them to me. And when I hear that answer, I always know that they're asking for the budget too soon. And the reason for that is I believe that there's a way of getting that budget toward the end of the conversation, but it happens after you've found out what they want. You've gone through that fact-finding stage. You've told them how to do business with you. But then during that sort of wrap up to the discussion, you've started to help them create a budget. So you are helping to build that budget. And when you start to do that, they start to see you as the expert and the advisor. And that's really, I think, where you start to build that trust and the partnership, and they start to feel those long-term benefits start to kick in. We'll move on, but I'll talk a little bit more about that here as we sort of go through these more direct slides. So during fact finding, we want to make sure that they know that we really truly care about what they want. And that really happens via the questions that we ask. It allows us to start to build a relationship. I'll give you my design build sales process, for example. When I would show up at a house to meet with a customer, I would always do everything in the same order. And I trained other staff to do the same thing. What was most important was when I would roll up to the house, I would always park on the street. I would park there because I didn't know if I was going to block somebody in or if somebody else was going to show up. It just shows some basic respect. I'd walk from the street to the front door, and that was my opportunity to do a few things. I wanted to check out what was there. I wanted to look at their cars. I wanted to look at their garage door, their front door, the roofing materials. I wanted to kind of understand how they see quality in their home as it stands today. That was an important piece. Now, when I'd get to the front door, the customer always knew that I needed to sit down at their kitchen table, ideally with both partners in the household, to discuss the project before going outside. And we would always explain that over the phone when we were booking the meeting, that was going to be an important thing that we needed to do to kind of kick off the conversation. So kind of a 15-minute meeting at the kitchen table, and then we'll do sort of a 15 to 45-minute meeting outside. And that first meeting's generally going to take about an hour. Sometimes we may go back inside and sit at the kitchen table and make a few more notes. And that's kind of, the expectation that the customer had for the meeting. We always want to tell them that in advance so they can prepare their house. We don't want to ask to go in their house without telling them in advance, but I always felt that that was an important piece. So once I get to the front door, they were expecting me to come in. And the only reason I really wanted to sit at the kitchen table, I just really wanted to get from the front door to the kitchen table so that I could look around and really see a few things. I wanted to see their artwork. I wanted to see their furniture, their flooring styles, their kitchen design. I wanted to see how they live. I wanted to see exactly what their taste was, because that told me so much information that it made it easier for me to kind of speak to their design sense once we got into discussing things in the backyard. Not knowing that, it would be really difficult to know whether they like sort of clean and modern or traditional or, colorful or more monotone. There's so many little things that you can gather from being inside the house. So my fact finding started inside. Then when I'd get outside, we would talk about more specifics about the project. It allowed me to really kind of ask the specific questions during my fact finding. And as we were sort of going through the backyard, I could really sort of find out any little things that, maybe were forgotten in the kitchen, but things about maybe the neighbors. Hey, I really want to block this neighbor. I really want to block that neighbor. But again, I'm still fact finding. Now, as the conversation would get a little further, now it's my opportunity to start to educate them. So I can talk about the specifics of the site. I might get a little bit technical about things like grading or drainage, and I might talk about, things that we could do to sort of solve some of the problems they're describing, but never going too far. I'm just trying to get that sort of confidence from the customer as we're sort of touring the property. Now, this might be a chance where you share a success story or two about another project where you had something similar that you've seen and how you fixed that problem for that customer. But ultimately, this is just your opportunity to really sort of show them that you are the expert to take the job on. And again, I would try to do a lot of this as that conversation was evolving, looking at the work. So I'm still asking questions, but I'm starting to educate. Now, creating the loyalty, this is what really replaces the traditional sales pitch. This is, I think, where you'll find yourself being more uncommon than anywhere else. This is definitely how I was able to grow my business in a way where we only took on really large budget design build projects over time. We did a lot of time and material billing, and it was very easy to kind of keep the pipeline full. And the reason for this was I replaced the traditional sales pitch with this loyalty building model, and it worked really well. So what I would do is, after I've kind of done my fact finding and some basic education and differentiation, I would really kind of take that to another level during what would be the sales pitch, with helping them create the buying criteria, creating lots of options, making it incredibly flexible to do business, and really kind of keeping things simple on the paperwork side of things. And that's really where time and material, or cost plus billing, came into play for me. So when I'd sit back down at the kitchen table now, after looking at the backyard with the customer, or looking at a project with a customer, when I'd get back to the table, what I would do is I would have made notes. And I always just like to carry really simple graph paper, with my logo on, and I'd sit down and I might have a pool and a cabana and a pergola structure and some privacy planting, fencing, patio. I'd have all these things noted. And when I'd sit back down and it came time to get that budget, that's where I always felt that I had the deal. if I could get the customer to open up a little bit around the budget, I knew that the deal was mine. So what I would do is I would sit with them and I would very confidently put in ranges. And I would say, okay, the pool is going to be, in the range of 65,000. The patio is probably going to be in the $30,000 range. The cabana is probably going to be 25,000. The pergola is going to be 15. And I'd go through that budget and, planting, lighting, irrigation, and I'd name off everything. And if that total, let's say, was 200,000, I'd say, I think, for everything we've talked about, we're probably in this budget range. You can see very quickly on somebody's face if 200,000 is completely off the mark. And generally, the way I would sort of look at that is I had an opportunity to either peel back and get within the budget range that they wanted, or not pursue the job at all, if that was sort of the range that I was looking at. But most often what I'd notice is customers, if my budget came up to 200 and they said, oof, yeah, I was thinking 100,000. Well, they just told me that I can have the job for $100,000, which is, for me, what makes the design build landscaping business one of the best businesses on earth. Is somebody just told me, hey, I'm going to give you 100,000. You just need to show me what you want to give me for it, which is what's most amazing here. Now I can start to design a project and estimate a project that's going to come in at $100,000 or maybe a touch more. And when I do that, I can value engineer it along the way to make a 20% profit. And I think that's what's so great about the business. When people go shopping for cars or other sort of commodity items, the price is more or less the price, and the profit margin's fixed long before the salesperson gets involved. The neat part in landscape is you're selling something. They just told you they're going to give you 100,000. You just need to give them something that's beautiful, that meets their needs, and you need to service them really well. And you can make a 15 or 20% profit doing it, which I think is really amazing. So creating that loyalty, they've now attached themselves to you because you've said, hey, you know what, your budget, I can do something for that budget. I'd like to get started with design, or if it's a landscape maintenance contract, I'd like to, write out a nice specification and put a proposal in front of you. In any case, we're going to kind of take the deal to the next level. But the important part is they know that you're flexible. They know that the way you're going to do business, you're going to work with them no matter what. And that loyalty, I think that you create in that first meeting more or less seals the deal. But you don't really get to this loyalty phase unless you're really good at the fact finding and education phase, because it's too easy to lose them on that fact finding and education piece. So you need this sort of three-part plan to be working in harmony. So the phone rings day to day in our businesses, and I think as the phone rings, often us landscapers, we tend to just react. And sometimes we think that we're, as landscapers, we're responsible to do everything outside the four walls of a house or a commercial building or whatever market you service. And I think the problem is with that, I know myself in my career, I made so many mistakes trying to do things that we weren't good at, or that we just weren't really specialists at, just thinking everything was an opportunity. And so, first and most important thing to do in a sales process is really just decide what you do as a company. And then I think it's important to stick to it. I'm not saying to say no when customers phone and ask you to do specialty work, but I think, have the good sense to subcontract it, put a markup on it, and make money off of other people's hard work. I just don't think it's worth trying to do everything as a company, because you're never going to be as efficient doing it as you should be. And I think what happens is you end up kind of putting a lot of time and effort everywhere from sales through to execution and customer service. doing things that you're just not well set up for. So it's hard to be good. So that the first step in your sales process is, what is it that you actually want to do? Who's your target customer? What do they look like? What does that customer persona actually look like? What locations geographically are you going to service? What types of services are you going to offer? And what does your contract look like? Super important, because the way that you get paid has a huge impact on the business. And I think sometimes, we just sort of accept that we can do business any way, shape, or form. And when we do that, we really sort of hurt things like cash flow and profitability. And I think, our sales process could eliminate a lot of that risk and a lot of those headaches as we go, just by sort of cleaning that up in a simple list of what we do and don't do, with some flexibility baked in along the way. And I'll kind of talk a little bit more about that flexibility as we go here. So the phone rings in the business, and I think our customer service or customer experience problems start from that first phone call in most businesses. We all get busy as landscapers. The phone starts ringing in the spring. It's hard to keep up. There's all kinds of demands. We've got warranty work from the previous year, all kinds of service requests, new installations. There's all kinds of things coming at us at once during that period. And what tends to happen in the industry, as we all know, because we wouldn't hear from so many customers that, hey, you're the only one that called me back, or you're the only one that showed up for the meeting. We miss our follow-up calls. We get too many meetings. I can remember trying to book so many meetings in the same night that I couldn't even get to them all, and then trying to rework the schedule while you're driving from meeting to meeting. It's super stressful. I think a lot of our customer service problems come from the way we answer the phone, the way we screen our calls, and then everything that happens thereafter. We turn our estimates around too slowly, and we lose customer information. We've got it kind of here and there and everywhere on scraps of paper. And ultimately, I think what happens is we end up breaking a lot of promises to our customers because we don't really have a system to keep it all straight. And really, ultimately, that's why we built the CRM. I think most of the people on this webinar today are customers, maybe a few new prospects for LMN, but ultimately, the CRM, you're probably already using it, was built for one purpose. It was to create that sort of memorable customer experience. If you're using this properly, you're going to be doing things like booking your sales meetings. You're going to be recording customer requests, creating tasks. You're going to create these to-dos for people in your company. You're going to kind of make some records on communication history, whether you're using the email to copy function for example, change orders and requests and things like that. But you're building a customer relationship management platform for yourself when you use it. And if you don't use it, then all of these little bits and pieces fall between the cracks. Last year, when we decided to build the CRM app, the Customer Relationship Manager app, that was our biggest request for a year and a half from our clients. Was we need something that's mobile to really manage our customer needs, because let's face it, that's where we are when we're running our businesses. The more you use it, the better the customer experience and the better your company will be. But it's directly linked to the first phone call that comes into the company. It needs to be tied into your sales process. Sometimes companies look at it as an after the sale feature. It really needs to be used as part of your sales process, because it's doing a number of things that are directly related to sales. It's tracking all of the to-dos and meetings, but more than that, all of the information related to the estimates and the likelihood to close and your pipeline, all these things are baked into the reporting system in the CRM. So when you go to create a sales process, you're gonna have to know what your revenue goal is for the year. And if you've got multiple salespeople, you need to create sales targets for each salesperson. And that goes for the owner too. If the owner is one of the salespeople, which is quite common in the business, they need a sales goal. And then everybody else who's selling needs a sales goal, because ultimately we need to get the sales number to where it needs to be in order to have a successful year. And obviously we give the budgeting software to the industry for free. And the reason we do that is we want to build a more healthy, robust landscape industry. But when you build your labor, equipment, material, subcontracting, and overhead budgets, your profit and loss is a result of your sales. And that's why, this sales process is so important. But, step one is really coming up with a plan for sales. And I think when we do that and we live by it, a lot of great things happen in our businesses. First off, everybody has a target. So each salesperson knows how much they need to sell, but it provides us that basic information for us to create our pricing structure and our estimates. And as most of you know, that's kind of the powerful feature of LMN is the budget and the markup numbers associated automatically create that pricing structure within the estimates. But we need to meet our sales goal. And in times like this, where I think everybody on the call is probably wondering, for lack of a better word, if they're going to be able to meet their sales goal this year. It's going to be an unusual year for sure, to say the least. When we create a plan, all of our expenses are based around our sales goal. So the first and most important thing in our plan is, what is that sales goal going to be, so that we can structure the business accordingly and tie our sales process and everything else to that plan. So the process relies on, I think, a key component, which is called a sales funnel. Now, as landscapers, if you're like me, when I thought of a funnel, it's obvious. It's something we pour oil or gas or something into to, make sure we don't spill. And I'd kind of like to look at the sales funnel the same way. We're pouring all kinds of leads in at the top, and a customer is going to spit out the bottom. And I don't want to spill good customers or good leads. So the funnel is a pretty good analogy. And I really think that if you don't have one in your business, that you should put some time into identifying what this funnel will look like in yours. So we have leads that come into our businesses, and we get them from all kinds of places. We've got leads that come from websites, social media posts, Google, referrals, and cold calls. Hopefully your website's as good as it can be. If you're not proud of it, then fix it up. It is today. It's definitely the first impression that a customer would have of you. If not, maybe you're actually your Google positioning and whatnot. But if you're not using social media paid advertising and Google paid advertising, I would suggest you give it a try. The pricing right now, or the market sort of pressures, have come down quite a bit based on the COVID outbreak. So it might be a good time to try social media and Google marketing. And if you're concerned about your sales, it might be a good opportunity to get some new business. Referrals, we always, as an industry, I've never been to a conference or heard anybody speak where they didn't say that referrals are the best way of getting business. Or when I speak and I ask in workshops, hey, what are your best leads? unanimously, the room will always say referrals. And, although I'm a huge fan of referrals, and I would have to be a fool not to be, they're definitely the most likely to close. And quite often, they're the easiest people to do business with. So naturally, I think over the years, I always sort of felt that they were my best leads as well. But I think that might be kind of a lazy person's way of thinking. When I look back at my career and I look at the turning points in my business where I really jumped to a new level and took on a new project that was sort of outside of what I had normally been doing, most of those came from outreach. The cold call, sorry, is the standard term. You say cold call to anybody and they kind of clam up. Nobody likes to do cold calling. But the reality is cold calling is not telemarketing. I'm not talking about sitting down and phoning, 3,000 people to try to get some new business. I'm talking about identifying great opportunities and having the confidence to reach out to that customer or architect or engineer, or maybe it's a municipality, and ask them for some time where you can just sit down and discuss doing some future business together. And I can tell you that had the highest return on my time invested when it came to sales work in my business of anything, whether it was sitting down with a municipality when I decided to get into the environmental business and showing them that we were the contractor of choice to do pond cleanouts and pond maintenance for stormwater management, or whether it was, reaching out to a really amazing landscape architect who had some really interesting large residential projects. Over the years, those outreach, those times when I sort of stepped out of my comfort zone and made the request for those meetings, those are the ones that made the biggest impact on what my company turned into. It wasn't always just referrals, because think about it for a minute. Your referrals keep bringing you customers very similar to the customers you have today. The odd time you might get referred to something that's bigger and better, but generally speaking, the best opportunities, they don't come looking for you. You need to go and look for them. You need to show them or explain to them what you have to offer. And if there's one piece of advice that I will give everybody on the call today, when it comes to a recession, which like it or not, we're headed into one, the best way to protect your business and grow your business during a recession is to get really good at identifying opportunities and then outreach. You have to go get those. They're not going to come to you. The nice part about a recession is people are generally more willing to look at more options. And if you have more options and you're a little bit better at handling the sales process, like we talked about earlier, and creating that loyalty rather than putting a sales pitch out, you'll find your business grows. During the last recession, in Canada, it hit a little bit later than it did in the US. It was kind of at its worst, I would say, between 2010 and 13. Those were the biggest growth years and the most profitable years as a ratio in my company in my 20-year career. So we made more money and we put on more revenue during the recession. And I can tell you for sure, I think the reason it happened was because I got nervous and I got really motivated to go out and outreach and find new business. And I think it was kind of the first time, because, the first 15 years in business were so good to me. Things were booming, work was coming at us. I didn't really put enough time into outreach. I did a little bit here and there, but not a lot. But during those years, I did a lot. And the relationships and the changes and impacts that it had on the business were incredible. So I can't stress enough that your leads come from many different places, but don't overlook cold calling or outreach. And in times like this, we're going to have to get good at doing that. Now, the leads come into our business, but just because they come in doesn't mean we want to actually work for them. again, when it comes to qualifying, it should happen on the phone first call. So whoever answers the phone in your company, they need to be really good at identifying whether or not the lead is good for you. Now, you don't want them to feel like they've just, um, gotten a security screening. You want this to be very natural and friendly, and your staff need to be trained to do it in a really positive way so that the customer feels welcomed while they're being qualified, which is difficult. This takes skill. This is something that you'll probably have to do some training, and then maybe even do some role play type training in the office where you're the customer and the person answering the phone is doing the screening. This is something where you're going to have to put a little work into it, but it will have a big impact on your business, because when you get good at it, you stop wasting time booking meetings for jobs that aren't relevant, and you find the customers that you really want to work for a lot faster. And that way your sales efforts are put into the right people, which makes your service level naturally better, because you're putting all your time into the right deals, as opposed to getting overwhelmed and not giving anybody a good experience. So ultimately, we want to talk about the basics, location and the type of work and specifications. We might, have a brief conversation during qualifying on the phone about the contract type. If, for example, if it's a landscape maintenance contract for an HOA, hey, are you looking for year round? Is the snow and the landscape maintenance in one contract, or is it split up? These little questions can sort of unfold during that phone call. And then ultimately, of course, we need to know what type of customer it is. Is it residential or commercial or institutional, industrial? Is it a municipal job? All these types of things need to be very clear in order for us to decide whether or not it's a good lead for us. Now, of course, fact finding, we've already talked a lot about in detail, and I'm not gonna rehearse that, but ultimately, the better we are at fact finding, regardless of the type of contract, the easier it is for us to start educating the customer. When you go to educate the customer, the reason it's so important to have different processes for different segments of the market, if you're selling snow versus residential design build, it's kind of obvious. We need a different package. We need a different portfolio. So the people who are selling the different services or the different things that you offer need to understand what the process looks like for each. And they also have to have the tools to be really good at what they do. You have to have a portfolio. You have to have a package that you can leave behind that's meaningful. You have to really understand how you're going to describe why the quality is different with you and what that customer service program looks like. You need to be able to describe the systems and processes and training that's in place in your company to really kind of deliver that best in class service that you claim to offer. The next phase is really quoting, and I think the way that you present your pricing has a huge impact on your ability to close. And that's why LMN's built the way it is. Often, whether they're service or install estimates, it's very easy to copy, to create different scenarios, to price the job different ways, whether it's per visit or per season. Whatever you're selling, I think it's important to allow the customer to have some options. The more ways there is to do business with your company, the more likely you are to close. For example, if you're out selling snow and you go to a great prospect and they've been paying all in for the season for the last 5 years, and you only like to sell, flat rate for snow plus salting, it's going to be hard to sway that customer because they're used to doing business a certain way. So sometimes we have to have that flexibility. And the powerful part about LMN estimating is it allows you to price those different methods with complete confidence because the numbers don't change. You can factor your risk levels based on the number of plow and salting applications in that example. But ultimately, your profit margin is set regardless of how you price the job. And that, I think, is kind of the important piece in allowing your customers to kind of pick and choose how to do business, and you to know that you're going to be profitable in any one of those scenarios. Building that quote up in the estimating software and having that flexibility to hold or delete or modify the quote gives you sort of that ability to answer to their requests very quickly, whether it be, over the phone or on a web meeting or, sitting at their kitchen table. You can work your numbers very quickly while you're sort of providing that relationship advice to the customer. Now, the next stage is the contract. Most landscapers, I think, are challenged when it comes to writing contracts. I think often the contracts get overlooked or not used, or there's a handshake. And my advice there is handshakes are great for basic introductions. They're not great for making a deal. And the reason for that is in a handshake, there's a lot of missed expectations. The customer's version of what they're expecting and your version of what you're providing are very different just by nature. And if you're relying on a handshake to get that right, you're asking for trouble. The only way to really get that right is to put it in writing and allow them to read it, ask questions, and then make sure that you guys are both moving forward with the same understanding. This is the most important thing in creating a good relationship, because when you go back to them for an extra, they understand why. When you give somebody a handshake deal and you go back for an extra later, they don't understand. So the trust is lost. So it's super important that the contract is written clearly, that the payment terms are understood, all the details of the contract, and that they've signed off and accepted that work. The contract's a key piece of the sales funnel because it sets the rest of your team up for success when they go to deliver what you've promised, and it sets up the relationship for long-term success so that you don't have to continually replace your customers over misunderstandings or missed expectations. Once that contract's out, there might be some negotiation on price or offers and discounts and things like that. But again, this is where I think you really stand your ground, knowing your numbers and having a good estimate that's tied to your budget. You know that you can't budge on price. All you can really budge on is providing some more flexibility in the way that you're going to do business or changing the scope slightly to meet their budget needs. But this negotiation piece is important. And when you're good at it and you go to flexibility in the way you're going to do business instead of just simply cutting your margin, you get to be a lot more of a trusted advisor, because they can see that you're just going to always bring them back to solutions as opposed to accepting, a lower price. You're really kind of changing their perception of you as a professional when you're good at doing that. And then last, and certainly not least, is we got to execute. And I think the sales process has a huge impact on how we execute, because we've made all these promises and we've told the customer what we're going to give them. Now it's time to go out and produce the work and do it profitably. And the only way that we can do that is if throughout the sales process, we promised the right things and we created the right estimate and the right project plan so that they can deliver and create profit in the field when they go to produce the work. And ultimately, I think the sales process has a huge impact on whether or not it's even possible to make profit. I think a lot of companies suffer because their sales process is so broken that it's impossible for the field to even generate a profit. We've probably all made those mistakes in our careers. I know I certainly have. And when you've made those mistakes, you have to identify that it all started with a broken sales process. A couple other things I just wanted to cover quickly here at the tail end here, and then I'll take some questions. There wasn't any as we went, but happy to answer some questions here at the end. Don't forget that the library is there for you. There's lots of forms and documents. You know, if you do have a little downtime right now with the social distancing protocols that are in place, good time to kind of work on systems. Check out the forms that we have in there. They're all Word and Excel based documents that you can customize, throw your logos on. You know, these things are here for you to use. And certainly, you know, if you've got a little bit of extra time over the next few weeks, it's a great way to put some time in there. Other things that we have for you, the Facebook user group, love to get more customers in there talking to one another. It's been fairly active. We're happy to see, you know, the customers interacting and providing advice and feedback to each other. And then we have a LinkedIn user group as well, if you prefer that platform. But you know, you get more out of LMN when you work with the other contractors using it. You can get a lot of advice, not only about LMN, but just about business in general if you get involved in these groups. So we love seeing a little bit more activity there if you're interested. And then obviously we've got lots of different ways for training. We've got the online academy. We spent a huge amount of time and investment over the past couple of years building that online academy for owners and their employees to become certified and learn more. We've always got your one-on-one support with your account reps. We now have virtual LMN workshops, which is the same workshop that we always offered in person. We're doing those online now, given the social distancing protocols in North America. And then we've got lots of these webinars coming up, a lot of contractor stories, you know, how-tos, good advice from contractors who have been through some rough recessions in the past, and we're really going to kind of try to share ideas and get through this together. So that was it for today. Happy to take some questions if anybody has any. Just go ahead and put them into your chat window, and we can answer those right now.
Hey, Mark, I've got a few questions coming in here now, so I'll start with the first one. What are your thoughts on sending unsolicited quotes or packages to snow or property maintenance prospects, and how does it fit into the sales process?
It fits into the sales process in many ways, but I guess outreach. So it's right up at the top of the funnel. They're leads, just like anybody else. So just because they don't call you, they're still leads. You can sort of segment your leads into different categories. We didn't get into that today, but you know, there's inbound leads and there's outbound leads, and those outbound are people that you're going to reach out to, and often you might call those targets. So you might create a list of targets that you want to focus on. And in the snow and ice business, I'll use that as an example. Landscape maintenance, I guess we could combine the two. If you're, let's say, in the commercial snow and ice and landscape maintenance business, if you've got 5 or 6 buildings in a geographical area, that's great. But if you've got 40 in a geographical area, that's much better. And you might make 15 or 20% net plowing snow on a street when you've got 2 buildings and you're plowing it with pickup trucks. But when you get 10 buildings or 12 buildings on that street, and rather than have a couple of pickup trucks picking away, you send one loader in and you knock off all of those buildings in one night with one operator, your revenue for that route, we'll call it, goes from, let's say, maybe 30,000 a year to $300,000 a year. And that's where I think the snow business and the landscape maintenance business becomes very lucrative, is route densification. We make a lot more money when we can get more work in a tighter area and use larger equipment to do it. Now, how do we do that? We can't just rely on referrals and incoming phone calls for that to happen. That doesn't happen by accident. And that's why I think outbound is so much more important than referrals, because we can target the business that we should be getting to make more money through route densification and other things. If it's a design build, maybe it's an architect that does the nicest projects in the area. But in any case, that outbound is going to get us where we want to go. And yes, I think pulling up on that street with your pickup truck, and if there's 10 buildings and you want all 10, site measure all 10. The site measuring tool is built right into LMN estimating. Pull the site measure, maybe drive the lot, but you can measure the entire property, drive the lot if it's not a secured property. And then, yes, do some outreach, get the name of the decision maker, and ask for a meeting wherever possible. I think just simply dropping quotes at the front desk, isn't always as effective. Certainly you can do that and then follow up to make sure they got it. But ultimately you want to get a conversation, and wherever possible, a meeting. But I think during an economic downturn like the one that we're facing, I think that's the best time to go out with that approach, because all of those building owners and businesses are facing an economic downturn as well, and they love to cut overhead during that time. So it's a good opportunity for you to go out and pitch a new way of doing business. Again, I'm not suggesting go out and just hack the pricing. I'm saying give them a more flexible way of doing business. And if they see your way of doing business as a potential cost savings, there's a good opportunity that you're going to get that work. So I'm a huge fan of outreach, and I think the more you do it, the more profitable you are, and the more top line revenue that you'll find.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. Question number 2. How does your time and material sales process differ from traditional sales? How were you successful on winning time and material work in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a certain type of project when it's design build. But I think what happens is when you start to work with home builders and architects, their customers are kind of used to a budget-based way of doing business. So if you're doing a lot of new custom homes, estate properties, that kind of thing, it kind of becomes natural. And I did focus on that type of work a lot. And the reason for that is a lot of the work that's happening in their homes is being sort of spec'd out and charged out on a T&M basis as they go, because they're working with a builder to develop their vision. So I would sort of fall into that category very easily on those types of projects. So if it was a new build, I kind of went with that T&M mindset out of the gate in my discussions and in my sort of education and loyalty building component of my sales process. So it became very organic. I was the advisor. I was helping them create a plan, and I was helping them create a budget, and then I would be the builder, and I'd maintain that budget using T&M billing, and I'd update them, every week or 2 weeks with where we stood. And I was held accountable to staying within the budget unless the scope changed, knowing that, quite often the scope changes and the budgets change along with it. For residential landscape maintenance, again, I was happy to do residential landscape maintenance. We were never a huge landscape maintenance company by any stretch, but $1.5 million or so in residential landscape maintenance. And the way that we did that was offering landscape maintenance to our existing customers who did design build projects. And those were always billed hourly as well. So the fact that we had already built the trust in doing the project, I always felt, hey, let's just give them a budget for their landscape maintenance. They're protecting their investment. We're going to do it by the hour, and we're going to do it really well and make recommendations and be proactive and do everything that that garden needs to become the garden that it could become. And we're going to charge hourly to do that. So the way that we would sell that was just by describing our service that way. And it wasn't for everybody, you know, and quite often it was significantly more expensive than other ways of getting pricing, but the quality was better too. And I think, you know, just explaining that the outcome of time and material is the customer gets exactly what they want, nothing more, nothing less, and they're paying for it at these, you know, agreed upon rates. There's a way to describe it very clearly to the customer, and the way that I always did that was, this is going to create a lasting relationship between us. You know the rates up front. I know what it takes to do the work. We're gonna tell you what that budget looks like, and we're gonna stay within that budget. But if you ask for other things, we're gonna be happy to do it and do them right and maintain the relationship the way we should. But you're gonna have to pay a little bit more money as we go. And the type of customers that I wanted understood that. So I think time and material is actually pretty easy to sell when you describe it in that context.
That's great. And I think we have time for one more question here. I know we're a little bit over the 1 o'clock mark, but for simple property maintenance quotes, do you suggest a low base price with upsell options or the gold, silver, bronze package type approach?
Yeah, personally, I kind of think that the option one, if we're going to kind of call it option one or two, is best for you as a contractor. And the reason for that, and just to be clear, option one is give them a base monthly price for, you know, mowing and trimming, and you may include a few other basic options, but then have sort of a rate card for all of the additional items. I think that's a more lucrative way of doing business. And the reason for that is you'll get a lot more maintenance contracts to sign on that base monthly contract. Don't do it so cheap that you're not making money. I think that should be priced at a 10% or higher profit margin. But it really focus on root concentration, and then your rate card items, everything that goes along with it, are where you make that really high net profit. So I think, you know, things like mulch and additional planting and seasonal color and seasonal lighting and, you know, doing pruning and cleanups by the hour and, you know, maybe even bed maintenance by the hour, all in addition, creates a lot more revenue potential. And the customers tend not to want to say no to those things on an ongoing basis because they can see they need them. Whereas when you do the sort of bronze, silver, gold, and platinum package, people always tend to take the bronze, but they still expect the platinum. It doesn't take them long to forget that they chose the bronze program. In the end, you're just the person that doesn't do a good job. Whereas I think when you have that base monthly contract and they opt in for these other things, they set value on your base package and they set value on all the additional work, and they see you as the solution provider or the expert. And if they don't want it, then it's kind of their own fault. And I think it just kind of changes that responsibility. So I hope that's helpful, but that's my opinion on that, those two different sort of strategies.
That's terrific. Thanks for your time today, Mark. That's all the questions that we had for today. I just wanted to remind everybody that this recording will be sent out to everyone that registered for today's session. And don't forget to register for next week's session, part 2 of Mark's series, Create a Hiring Process to Build a Winning Team. That's next April 7th at noon EST. Thanks again for joining us today, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. And if anybody has any other questions, you can always get me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty good at responding to questions there if there's anything else that pops up. And don't forget, your customer advisors are always there to answer questions at LMN. So if you want some one-on-one time, you can always book 30 minutes with your account rep and kind of work through any problems you might be having. But aside from that, just wanted to wish everybody good luck dealing with the outbreak, and hopefully you and your families are as healthy as could be. But thanks for tuning in today.